On my 16th birthday, my rich grandfather called and said, "Come to my office, there's something you need to see." When I arrived, he showed me a video of my parents planning to steal my inheritance. "Now, what will you do about it?" He smirked. I never expected my 16th birthday to change my life forever. To be honest, I wasn't even excited about it. Birthdays in my family weren't exactly warm celebrations. My parents, Mark and Olivia Whitmore, weren't the type to throw surprise parties or bake homemade cakes. They were the kind of parents who handed me an expensive gift, carefully selected to impress rather than mean something, before disappearing into their own world of social events, business meetings, and high society drama. So, when my phone rang that morning, I expected a half-hearted happy birthday from my dad, maybe a reminder from my mom to act grateful for whatever check they planned to hand me. Instead, it was my grandfather. "Come to my office," he said, his voice as sharp as ever. "There's something you need to see." No explanation. No greeting. Just an order. Henry Whitmore wasn't a man who wasted words. He was a legend in our family, a self-made millionaire who clawed his way up from nothing, built an empire, and ruled over it with an iron will. He wasn't warm, but he was present in a way my parents never were. When he spoke, people listened. When he gave an order, you obeyed. I didn't argue. After hanging up, I threw on some decent clothes, grabbed my jacket, and left without bothering to tell my parents where I was going. They probably wouldn't notice. My grandfather's office was in downtown Chicago, in one of those old, prestigious buildings that smelled like leather, cigars, and history. The kind of place where deals worth millions were made over a single handshake. When I arrived, his assistant barely glanced at me before waving me through. I stepped into the large office, and there he was, sitting behind his massive mahogany desk, a glass of whiskey in his hand, even though it wasn't even noon yet. "Sit," he said, gesturing to the chair in front of him. I sat. He studied me for a moment, his piercing blue eyes scanning my face like he was searching for something. Then, without a word, he turned his laptop screen toward me and pressed play on a video file. I wasn't sure what I expected, but it wasn't what I saw. The screen showed my parents, Mark and Olivia, sitting in our dining room. My father looked tense, running a hand through his graying hair, while my mother's expression was sharper, calculating. "He's turning 16, my dad said, his voice low but urgent. "Henry will probably start bringing him into the business soon. Grooming him for the inheritance." "He can't do that," my mother snapped. "That money should be ours. We're the ones who put up with that old man's rules, his conditions. Why should he just hand everything over to some kid?" My stomach twisted. They were talking about me. Mark let out a frustrated sigh. "You think I don't know that? But if we don't act fast, it'll all be legally tied to him. We need a plan." "Then let's make one," Olivia said smoothly. There was a coldness in her voice that made my skin prickle. "We get close to him. Make him trust us. Then, when the time is right, we push Henry to adjust his will. If he refuses, we have other ways." My father hesitated. "Other ways?" A slow smirk spread across my mother's face. "Accidents happen." The video ended. The room was silent. I couldn't breathe. I looked at my grandfather, my hands clenched into fists. My own parents, people who were supposed to love and protect me, were plotting against me. And if Henry got in their way? They were willing to get rid of him. I felt sick. Henry leaned back in his chair, took a slow sip of his whiskey, and finally spoke. "Now," he said, his voice calm but heavy with meaning. "What will you do about it?" I opened my mouth, but nothing came out. My mind was racing. "What the HLL is this?" I finally managed. "You saw it," Henry said, setting his glass down. "I had them recorded. I've suspected them for years, but now I have proof. Your parents want my money. And they're willing to eliminate anyone in their way." "They're my parents," I said, my voice cracking. "They're traitors," he corrected coldly. "And now, you have a choice to make." I swallowed hard. My hands were shaking. This couldn't be real. My parents weren't murderers. Were they? "You're 16 now," Henry continued. "Old enough to understand that the world is ugly. Old enough to decide where your loyalties lie." "My loyalties?" I repeated. "Yes." He steepled his fingers. "You can pretend you never saw this. Go home. Act like nothing happened. Or, you can stand with me. If you do, I'll make sure they never get a single cent. I'll cut them off completely. And if they try anything." He gave me a knowing look. "I'll handle it." My mouth went dry. He wasn't just talking about legal action. Henry Whitmore was a powerful man. And powerful men didn't play by the rules. I thought of my mother's smirk. My father's hesitation. The way they didn't object to the idea of an accident. Could I really go home and act normal? Sit at the dinner table with them, knowing what I knew? Knowing that if they had their way, I'd be nothing? That they might even hurt my grandfather, maybe even me, if it meant getting what they wanted? I looked back at Henry. His face was unreadable, but I could feel the weight of his expectations. I had a choice to make. And I had no idea what to do. I sat there, staring at my grandfather. The weight of what I had just seen pressed down on me like a boulder. My hands felt clammy, my stomach twisted into knots. This wasn't just some mistake or misunderstanding. My parents had planned this. They had talked about it so casually, like they were discussing what to order for dinner. They weren't worried about what it would do to me, how it would tear everything apart. They only cared about the money. And now, Henry was looking at me like I was supposed to know what to do next. But I didn't. I felt like a kid who had just been pushed into a war I wasn't ready for. I cleared my throat, but my voice still came out shaky. Why are you showing me this? Henry's expression didn't change. Because you deserve to know the truth. And because, whether you like it or not, you have a role to play in what happens next. My role. I had always felt like an outsider in my own family. My parents loved me in the way someone loves an investment, the way you love something that's supposed to bring you status and security. I was their Whitmore heir, their golden ticket to staying in the world my grandfather had built. But they never actually saw me. I swallowed hard. What are you expecting me to do? Henry leaned back in his chair, studying me. That depends. Do you still trust them? I almost laughed at how ridiculous the question was. But the truth was, I didn't know how to answer. Could I really believe that my parents were capable of that? Then I remembered my mother's voice. That smirk. Accidents happen. I clenched my fists. I don't know, I admitted. It was the only honest thing I could say. Henry didn't look surprised. That's fair. But you need to understand something, boy, this isn't a game. Your parents aren't just greedy. They're dangerous. They've spent their whole lives feeling entitled to my money, and now they're realizing that they might never get it. Desperate people do desperate things. I stared at the laptop screen, at the frozen image of my mother and father mid-conversation. They had no idea they'd been recorded. They had no idea I knew. The air felt thick between us. Henry let out a sigh and tapped his fingers on the desk. I can cut them off, he said. Completely. No more handouts, no more trust funds, no more second chances. They'll have nothing. But that's a decision you have to make. Because if I do this, it won't just be war between me and them. It'll be war between you and them, too. The idea of going against my parents, of openly standing on my grandfather's side, made me feel sick. But the idea of doing nothing, of going home and pretending like I hadn't seen that video, was worse. Still, I needed to think. Can I have some time? I asked. Henry nodded slowly. You have until tomorrow morning. That wasn't much time at all. I stood up, my legs feeling unsteady beneath me. My head was spinning, my heart pounding so hard it felt like it was rattling my ribs. I walked out of the office in a daze, barely even registering Henry's assistant as I passed her desk. By the time I got outside, the cool Chicago air hit me like a slap to the face. I needed to breathe. I needed to think, but more than anything, I needed to know what I was walking into when I went home that night. The entire car ride back, I kept replaying the video in my head. My mother's voice. My father's hesitation. The unspoken agreement between them. Had I just been blind this whole time? Had I missed the signs? Or had I always known, deep down, that something about my parents wasn't right? I pulled up to the house, our pristine, overpriced suburban mansion, and sat in the car for a moment, staring at the front door. It was a perfect house on the outside. Just like my parents. I took a deep breath and walked inside. Dinner that night was just the three of us. My parents were already seated at the long dining table, a perfectly plated meal in front of them. The housekeeper must have just finished setting the table because she gave me a polite nod before disappearing into the kitchen. There he is, my mother said, smiling. How was your day? Her voice was smooth, effortless. Fake. I sat down across from them, forcing myself to keep my expression neutral. Fine. My father glanced up from his plate. You were out for a while. I shrugged. Just went downtown. He nodded, but I saw something flicker in his eyes. Suspicion? Worry? Did he already know I had gone to Henry's office? My mother, ever the picture of charm, took a sip of her wine. I hope you weren't doing anything reckless. You're getting older now. More responsibility, more expectations. I fought the urge to laugh. More expectations? Was she seriously playing the concerned parent right now? I stabbed my fork into a piece of steak, forcing myself to eat. I needed to act normal. I needed to figure out how much they knew, how much they suspected. So, I said casually, I talked to Grandpa today. My father's fork froze midair. My mother, on the other hand, barely reacted. Oh? She said smoothly. And what did he have to say? I chewed slowly, thinking carefully. Nothing much. Just business talk. My father relaxed slightly, but I didn't miss the tension in his shoulders. My mother, however, was watching me closely. Business talk, she repeated. Henry never really had those kinds of conversations with you before. I shrugged again. Guess he thinks I'm getting older. There was a brief pause. Then my mother smiled, but there was something behind her eyes, something unreadable. That's good, she said. You should get close to him. He trusts you. The word sent a chill down my spine. He trusts you. I stared at my plate, my appetite gone. I had a choice to make. And I had less than 24 hours to make it. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, my mind racing. I had spent my whole life believing that my parents, despite their flaws, cared about me. But now I knew the truth. To them, I was just an obstacle. I rolled over, glancing at the clock. 2:17 a.m. Then I heard something. Footsteps. Slow, careful footsteps outside my room. My stomach dropped. I held my breath, listening. Then, click. The doorknob turned. The doorknob turned slowly. I felt a spike of adrenaline as I lay frozen in bed, every nerve in my body on high alert. Was I imagining things? Had I just been so on edge that I was hearing things that weren't there? Then, another soft click. Someone was definitely trying to open my door. I forced myself to stay still, breathing as quietly as possible. The door didn't open all the way, just enough for a sliver of dim hallway light to seep into my room. I saw the outline of someone standing there. Watching. Then, after what felt like an eternity, the door closed again. I stayed in bed, my body stiff, until I heard retreating footsteps down the hall. That's when I knew. My parents suspected something. And they were checking on me. I waited a few minutes before carefully slipping out of bed and pressing my ear to the door. Silence. My heart was still hammering, but my mind was clear now. I couldn't wait until morning to make my decision. I had to act. Now. I grabbed my phone and texted Henry. They just tried to check on me in the middle of the night. I need to do this now. I wasn't expecting him to reply immediately, it was almost 3 a.m, after all. But within seconds, my phone buzzed. Henry, good. Meet me in my office in an hour. And bring your passport. Passport? That set off alarm bells in my head, but I didn't have time to question it. I grabbed it from my drawer, along with my wallet, and shoved them into my backpack. Then, as quietly as I could, I slipped out of my room and made my way down the back staircase, avoiding the parts of the house where the floor creaked. I was out the door in less than 5 minutes. When I arrived at Henry's office, he was already there, dressed in his usual tailored suit, looking as composed as ever. His assistant wasn't there, no one was. Just him, sitting at his desk, sipping his usual glass of whiskey. I threw my backpack onto the chair. I'm ready. He nodded approvingly. Good. I have a plan. But first, tell me, what do you want? I hadn't expected that question. I hesitated. I hadn't thought about it in those exact terms. I want them to pay for what they did. But I don't want revenge in some violent way. I just want them to lose. I want them to see what they almost had, and then watch it slip through their fingers. A slow, satisfied smile spread across Henry's face. That, he said, raising his glass slightly, is exactly the kind of thinking I wanted to hear. Then he pulled open a desk drawer and took out a folder. He slid it across the desk toward me. Sign these, he said. I opened it, and my eyes widened. It was a legal document. One that would officially transfer everything in Henry's will directly to me. All the properties. The businesses. The assets. The entire Whitmore fortune. I looked up at him in shock. You're cutting them out completely? His expression darkened. They made their choice. I swallowed. This was it. If I signed this, my parents wouldn't just lose their access to my grandfather's wealth. They'd lose any leverage they had. No more handouts, no more trust funds. No safety net. They'd be left with nothing. I grabbed the pen. And I signed. The betrayal unfolds the next morning. Henry called for a family meeting at his estate. I arrived first, sitting in one of the grand chairs in his study while I waited. I was anxious but steady. I knew I had done the right thing. Then the door opened, and my parents walked in. They looked slightly wary, Like they knew something was coming but weren't sure what. My mother's sharp gaze flickered to me, then to Henry. What's this about? Henry didn't waste time. He tossed a thick envelope onto the table in front of them. Your official notice, he said smoothly. My father picked it up and opened it. His face went pale as he read. What the HLL is this? He demanded. Henry took a slow sip of his whiskey before answering. It means your time leeching off of me is over. Effective immediately, you no longer have access to my accounts, my properties, or any of my assets. The businesses? The investments? They all belong to him now. He nodded toward me. I've transferred everything to my grandson. You get nothing. My mother's lips parted, and for the first time in my life, I saw real panic in her eyes. That's not possible, she said, her voice cracking. You can't just. I can, Henry interrupted. And I did. She turned to me, her expression twisting into something desperate. You wouldn't do this to us. I held her gaze, my stomach tightening. You were going to do it to me, I said quietly. I just beat you to it. My father slammed his fist onto the table. This is a mistake. No, Henry said, his voice cold. The mistake was underestimating the boy. My mother opened her mouth like she wanted to say something else, but she must have realized there was no point. The truth was in front of her. They had lost. Completely. She let out a shaky breath, then stood, smoothing down her skirt like she still had control. You'll regret this, she whispered, her voice trembling just slightly. Then she turned on her heel and walked out. My father hesitated for a moment longer, looking at Henry like he wanted to fight, but in the end, he knew there was no winning. Without another word, he followed my mother. I watched them leave, my chest rising and falling with each deep breath I took. Henry let out a satisfied sigh. Well, he said, leaning back, that was entertaining. I exhaled. I still can't believe I trailed off, shaking my head. I guess I always hoped they'd love me more than they love the money. Henry gave me a look, not pitying, not cruel. Just knowing. Some people don't know how to love without conditions, he said simply. I nodded, swallowing down the last of my emotions. It still hurt. But I wasn't broken. And I wasn't alone. Henry picked up his glass and gave me a small smirk. You know, he said, I think you'll do just fine in this family after all. I met his gaze. And for the first time, I believed it. Because I wasn't just a pawn anymore.